How are you? My name is John Erickson. I'm a professor at the University of Vermont. I've been working with Brynhildur Davidsdottir. Is that close? We've been team teaching this course together with a group of University of Vermont students and a group of University of Iceland students. And I think, as you all know, we've been working on the Genuine Progress Indicator, an alternative way of looking at development here in the context of Iceland. So we've been working on this off and on throughout the semester over the internet, and then we got together for 2 weeks, and we're at the end of our second week. We're all very tired. We were up very late, pulling together the data. This is very much a draft of what we've done so far, but we thought we'd at least give you a taste of what we're trying to do in pulling together this Genuine Progress Indicator. And then I will do just a quick introduction. The students will come up and present the guts of this, and then Brynhildur will close with some next steps that we hope to do. So genuine development. If you saw my talk earlier last week, I apologize, but just a few slides to set the tone here. The day most of us arrived in Iceland, a week ago Sunday, there was an article in the New York Times Magazine called The Rise and Fall of GDP. There is a lot of press right now, a lot of popular press paying attention to the idea of some kind of transition, some need for new kinds of indicators that measure progress, that measure success, that measure economic well-being. This article captured this notion in kind of this caricature between high GDP man and low GDP man. High GDP man never spends time with his family, works 2-3 jobs, has no leisure time, is a polluter, maybe he's been divorced 3 or 4 times and supports 4 or 5 households. Basically, he's contributing a lot to GDP, but not necessarily contributing a lot to the welfare of society, or his or herself. Versus low GDP person has a lot of leisure time and hangs out and spends time with their family, takes long vacations, is a horrible citizen in terms of GDP. But are we measuring well-being the correct way? So this article lays this out, and the indicator work that this class has been working on is exactly the intention. GDP counts everything as a benefit and nothing as a cost. What we're trying to do is systematically go through GDP and see what is actually a benefit, what actually improves human well-being, and what is a cost, and what kinds of things does GDP leave out. So our starting point was to review the literature, and we looked at what was early on the Index of Sustainable Economic Well-Being, which today is called the Genuine Progress Indicator. This kind of work has been done in dozens of countries at this point. This highlights a few of the nations that have done this kind of work that we've undertaken here in Iceland. You can see by this measure, the United States, UK, Germany, all of these countries have been in a recession for some time, as measured by the Index of Sustainable Economic Well-Being. Either they are, the costs of growth are outweighing the benefits, or they're not living off of income anymore, they're depreciating capital, various kinds of capital. So if you look at the United States, our ISEW peaked in 1975 and has been flat or declining ever since, while GDP continues to rise. So we're trying to kind of capture that here in the context of Iceland, and again, not assume that all things in GDP are benefits. We're trying to systematically go through and ask, what's a benefit, what's a cost? These are some of the calculations that we've done. This shows the Genuine Progress Indicator, and the students are going to come up and highlight a few of those. Some are additions. So again, high GDP man always spends money on babysitters and daycare and never spends any time with his children. Good for GDP, bad for GPI. Okay, so there's a value to parenting, there's a value to household work inside of GPI. High GDP man never takes any vacations, never has any leisure, works. That's good for GDP, but it's bad for GPI. So these things are additions. If you have more leisure time, that's an addition. If you have volunteer work, that's an addition to GPI. There are also subtractions. There are various costs to growth, costs to a growing GDP that are taken into account in our calculations. And then we also look at net capital investment and net foreign borrowing. If you're consuming a lot today, by leveraging your assets in the future, that should be taken into account as well. So we've done some adjustments according to that. Very briefly, a lot of the GPI work has happened in the United States. There's been many national studies around the world, but the US has done probably the most annual studies of GPI. And as I mentioned before, GPI peaked in '75 and has been flat or declining ever since, while GDP continues to rise. So we're trying to get at a similar sort of graph for Iceland. The reason we did this partnership between the University of Iceland and the University of Vermont is Vermont has a lot of experience in this. We've contributed to national studies, but we've also done a lot of state studies. The state of Vermont, the state of Ohio, the state of Maryland at this point. So there's some consistency that's starting to arise in how you do GPI. And what we're starting to see is it's much like the 1940s and 50s. We didn't have good indicators of the macroeconomy then. We don't have good indicators of the earth economy now. And so we're seeing this transition happen right before our eyes, and we're hoping that Iceland can take the lead. This momentum, as I mentioned, we're seeing it in the popular press. Here in Europe, there was a big conference called Beyond GDP in November of 2007 that has really put some momentum behind this. Brynhildur and I spoke with Statistics Iceland yesterday, and all of the various countries in Europe are getting kind of pressured to collect new kinds of indicator data. They're not getting the staff and resources to do it, but nevertheless, they're getting pressured to create new kinds of indicator data along the lines of what we're doing. You've probably heard of the Sarkozy Commission, chaired by Joseph Stiglitz, that brought a lot of global attention to sort of rethinking GDP as a metric of economic success. We recently did some work in Washington, D.C. with our own Bureau of Economic Analysis on exactly this topic, to see what would it take to collect the kind of information that would be required. And it's gaining some academic credibility. We're seeing ecological economics as a maturing field. We're seeing the standardization of this approach through not only national studies, but state-level studies. And we're starting to be able to take all of that experience and apply it to new country studies, such as the one here in Iceland. So, this is what we found. And let me again stress, this is a draft, okay? We had fairly good data in the most recent decade. Some calculations had pretty good data in the 90s. We tried to go back to 1965, so we had to do a lot of backcasting when there wasn't really good data in past years. But we really wanted to kind of get a sense of, could we capture some of the major trends in the Icelandic economy according to these various GPI calculations. This is real personal consumption per capita in the blue line. You can see GPI doesn't always have to be below, like it is in the United States, GDP, or personal consumption. Sometimes it can be above. What we found as a preliminary result, based on a lot of our backcasting of the data, is that Iceland was sort of in this period here where the costs of running the economy were higher than the benefits. For example, one of the effects that we're seeing here is very little leisure time in the workforce. We found good data on basically little to no leisure time, high working hours per week that really detracts from GDP and brings you down here. As Iceland has grown, we've found a period where perhaps GPI actually was higher than GDP, where, for example, what our calculation picks up is the substitution away from oil, a non-renewable resource, which GPI depreciates, towards a renewable resource, geothermal. And we also trying to figure out how to slightly depreciate geothermal as well. And this